Fateh was supposed to give the introduction, but it seems like she's not around. I think that Brian will still continue looking for her and find her. So Dr. Cheikh Mbow is the Executive Director of START International in Washington, adjunct professor at the Michigan State University, the forestry and coordinating the lead authors of IPCC. He has been a senior scientist at the World Agroforestry Center, ICRAF, and served in scientific committees such as the Global Land Project from 2004 to 2010, at IGBP from 2012 and 2014. Welcome back, Fateh. And Future Health from 2013 to 2015. So Dr. Mbow works on research and capacity buildings on land resource management in developing countries. So today, the title of his talk is Will Africa Meet or Miss the Sustainable Development Goals? So I think that if there is something I missed, I will give the opportunity to Dr. Mbow to continue with the presentation and other things. So, Doctor, thank you very much and welcome again.
Before I start, I'll have to tell you that I came from Latin America yesterday with a very serious flu flight. So my voice is not as it should be, and I might interrupt sometimes, just coughing, etc. So I excuse myself if those things happen because of this very bad flu which I had. But I decided to continue doing this webinar because of its importance. I was the one who was pushing so much on the early career scientists on system sustainability in the Future Earth community. And the food, energy, water nexus, and many other things that is relevant for the next generation. So today, what I'm going to talk about is the issue in Africa. We have an agenda for 2030, and 2030 is just 12 years ahead of us, actually 11 years. 11 years for Africa means 11 rainy season, 11 growing season. It's too short for the ambition, I think, we have for the SDGs to be reached. And we have to think creatively how in the next 11 years we create the deep transformation which is required to have zero hunger, to have health for all, to manage resources in land, to manage all the 17 goals in one. So it's a really big challenge, and I want to go through with you as an early career scientist on a few of the challenges that you may take on your plate as a way to do actions and help leapfrog the process of sustainable development in Africa. So the title of my presentation is, can we really meet the SDGs, or do we have worries that we will miss the SDGs? And I will tell you why this question was asked as a title of this presentation. So along this presentation, not in order, I will talk about issues related to the baseline. So when you talk about SDGs, I realize that countries do not come from the same baseline. Think about Malawi or Senegal, trying to reach zero hunger as compared to France and Germany. So the baseline is not the same, and that's one level of challenge, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a wealth of different other challenges related to governance, related to funding of research to create the transformation. And another level of challenge is the diversity and the plurality of global transformation, which are discussed at high level, and yet they want people to address the goals at local level without creating an iteration, a kind of combined rhetoric between the high level and the local level. And that's really one thing which is very, very important. The fourth level of challenge is the issue of which angle to get this thing done. What the prongs of attack? Where to start? What is the entry point? It's really challenging because the diversity of problems are so high that knowing exactly where to activate transformation and start activating transformation might be one of the big challenges we have. And then looking the way forward for 11 years, what needs to be done? How can we create transformation to reach the SDGs? These are really some of the key questions we have in this presentation, and I will take you through those points. And first of all, when you see the documents related to Africa, most of them take Africa as one piece. Sub-Saharan Africa, they put everything inside. Africa is such a huge continent. You can accommodate almost 11 big countries of the world and then have some pocket left. And the diversity within the continent is so high. Diversity in terms of cultural value, diversity in terms of ecosystem, in terms of development, etc. So having one solution that fits all countries is just impossible. So we need to go by case-to-case basis, the context-specific solutions to make sure that what we are doing has some impact on the ground. But coming back to the facts, what do we know about Africa is that it's a very populated continent, 13% or 14% of the world population. But in terms of research, Africa accounts just 1% of the world researchers, 1% of the research output, a tiny bit of global patents, and the money which is invested to research is just meaningless. And at the same time, the pledge to invest 1% of the GDP to research and development has not gone very far. So just to think about doing science to create transformation as a way forward, we have a baseline which is just too low. We don't invest much on research. And most of this investment, as you all know, my colleagues, is this investment comes from developed countries, does not come from our countries. There is a little bit of improvement in the recent years, but altogether, we all get our resource funding from outside, and that does not create the rapid deep transformation we want to take and move forward for the country. One of the level of challenge here, level of challenge number one, is that these goals are negotiated globally, and people want to apply those and act locally. I think there is a tension here. When these people negotiate, yeah, they think about the population, but without, having a bottom-up approach, I suspect that this high-level discussion remains intellectual ones, as it was in the MDGs. It's picture-perfect aims, intellectually, sound, but when it comes to the ground, people do not know. Actually, The SDGs has gone for 3 years, and if you go to the villages, nobody knows about SDGs. That's the problem. If you go to any village in Africa or even small towns and you talk about SDGs, people might not know. And the success or failure of SDGs remain tightly linked with the engagement of community and people on the ground to develop action, to create transformation, and to reach the goal forward. So level challenge number one is that high level discussions, but low implication, low engagement of communities on the goals. Level challenge two. Level challenge two came from our crossroad conference in Bonn, where we were thinking about the diversity of aspirations, the diversity of goals that local communities can have. And as we was discussing, we asked an artist to really pitch the messages on a wall. And what comes out is this picture you see. So many different interests, so many different aspirations, so many scenarios, so many urgency level, so many issues of equity, etc., etc., and governance discrepancies that the ambition to reach the goals in 2011, in 2030, in 11 years, will depend to a great deal of reorganizing ourselves and trying to really have a genuine approach, a really clear pathway through which we have to address the SDGs. So we are dealing with the conundrum. One thing is to have the SDGs. The other thing is to see the social economic environment where this SDG should be applied. And when you go to that level, I mean, you have 1,000 directions you can take for different SDGs. They seem to be very simple, only 17, but each of them holds a great deal of targets and indicators that is too complex to be addressed at local level. So that was challenge level number two. Challenge level number three is that Africa has a diversity of challenges. Land use, land degradation, energy supply, youth jobs, entrepreneurship, and YESS is trying to address that. Sustainable production, food, technology, gender, etc. So name it, but look at this one. When it comes to land challenges, you have so many difficult problems related to urbanization, related to coastal erosion, flooding, wood energy, erosion, so many problems in land, and yet the land is the basis of the most of these objectives to be addressed, like food security, like life in land, and the issue of food security, etc. So difficult to have transformation in all these issues without creating a new science, a new way of doing science to move the agenda forward. Level challenge number four is the issue of the method. So many rhetorics or method or approach have been pitched in the transformation arena. System thinking, multidisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, the issue of space and scales, participatory, etc. But where are we compared to those? When we talk about system thinking, what happened is people are selecting the most important aspect to do, and they don't do system thinking. When it comes to multidisciplinarity, people go to issue linkages and try to simplify the process. When you go to the issue of participation, it's more like panels and science committees. And participation is not as at the level we would expect it to be to move the agenda forward. The issue of holistic approach, head sectors. And my sense is, I don't care about what the approach you put in place. What I care about is the process for the outcome. The process for the outcome should be including the local communities working with local stakeholders to attain one big transformation that speaks to the SDGs. What happened is we spend too much time in trying to explain and nudge down the type of conceptually sound paradigm which has no implication really on the practice. And that's really a big issue of the challenge. The labor challenge number 5 could be easily seen in the tension between the rich and the poor. Africa is a poor country, but you have so many rich people. Who does not have the same aspiration with the poorest communities. And you can see from Lagos to Dakar to Nairobi to Cape Town, a differentiated set of actors who care about various issues. If you go to the poor communities, they did about informal sector, livelihood challenges, health and safety, inequality, etc. But then you go to the rich community, it's an issue of creating, doing business, advancing, technology and developing smart solutions, for production. But both of them have some impact on the environment, and we need to be very peculiar on ways we address those issues. Now, to address all these challenges, there is not only the SDG framework, but we have other frameworks. Paris Agreement is one of them, the Paris goals. They also want to create transformation, to shift on low carbon development. The whole aim of the Paris goal is to limit the global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. And this requires a deep transformation for all countries, such as the SDGs, and there is an overlap between the Paris goal and the SDG on climate change, which are targeting the same kind of objective. So the Paris goal also look for climate resilience, equity, and adaptation. But yet again, the issue of finance, technology, and knowledge is at the kernel of the Paris goal. Beside the Paris goal, which we try to put here as a very differentiated set of possible action, where developed countries still pollute much more than developing countries. We need to look at what this declaration says as compared to what our ambitions are. 2030 agenda says that we commit to making fundamental change in the way that our society produces and consumes goods and services. And SDGs 12.2 says achieving the sustainable management and efficiency on natural resources is one of the things. So if you go back to the old Agenda 20, Agenda 21, it was exactly the same thing. So to me, the question we are asking, is it Is there anything new in the SDGs? And if you look carefully, I think there is nothing new in the SDGs. But what will be new is the approach of achieving the goals. The approach of achieving the goals is the only thing which I think is, is new in the SDGs, and I will tell you why. In this slide, you will see there is a big set of overlap between the Paris Agenda, the Agenda 2030, the Bond Challenge on land degradation, the IK target on biodiversity, the Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction. So we are, excuse me, we are bombarded by global agenda. Everybody puts an agenda on the table. We are bombarded by assessment, global environmental assessment, IP-based assessment, IPCC assessment, land degradation assessment, so many set of information, but we are not good enough to create the space of action. And that's where really the frustration comes in when you take the Africa context. And the other problem is those big overarching problems are not connected to the community level. And that's a big issue we are dealing with. I tried to use some statistics from the African Development Bank to understand where we are coming from. And in this particular graph, you have the poverty rate and the urban-rural differentiation. So most of the African countries, as you can see, are over 40% of poverty, and rural areas are much poorer than urban areas. So these are the nitty-gritty aspects of the problems we need to bring upfront to address the issue of poverty, not just having a blanket solution space where you're saying you create business and that you think that the genuine thing will rise and the solution will pump out. You need to understand for each country what's the specifics. For each sub-country level, what's the specifics? And go down to the community level. What are the specifics that needs to be addressed? And we did not do that work. We stay only at the high level. Everybody understands the 17 goals, but nobody, created a detailed set of information for the scale on which we should implement the SDGs to understand what's the problem to be addressed. And as long as we don't do that, I don't think we will start solutions that speaks to the SDGs. And time is running very fast. Look at this. The top graph is all about the consumption of calories. Africa is the red trend. It's improving, but it's far from the level of the world. And the graph below is the issue of the prevalence of undernourishment. And you can see that undernourishment is quite correlated to poverty level, to GDP. So the issue of poverty is an entry point, but we just talk about poverty as one general thing. We don't nudge it down, we don't have the details in the ground to see which community is more vulnerable, where to act exactly, who to target. And this really detailed level is missing on the SDGs. We do reporting at very high macro indicators, and it does not help too much, and everybody can put everything he wants, I think, and that does not move us forward. So when you take these statistics again, you can see that Africa is improving in some areas. On the area of services, you see the mobile line, the mobile telephone uses is increasing at high speed. Internet also is increasing slightly, but still 20% of the continent use internet. What worries me is the issue of water and electric supply. Water supply is very low first, and then urban areas are better off than rural areas. Same thing with electricity. Electricity comes to less than 50% in rural areas, and it can reach about 75% in urban areas. So still the discrepancy between rural and urban, but altogether those services are improving in Africa in a low rate, but yet it's a good signal and we should accelerate that. At the same time, while we are trying to improve, climate is there to cancel our effort. This is a graphic showing the frequency of extreme events in Africa. So drought event, flood event, extreme temperature, storms are coming as a very high level from 2000 to now. And everything we achieve in some areas of development might be cancelled by this extreme weather event. So climate change is really impacting on the development of Africa. And as you all see, the money which is invested to climate change is very low, mostly in terms of adaptation, in terms of loss and damages. There is nothing that people do. We follow the rhetoric on mitigation, carbon sequestration, and that's not where our priority is. Our priority is to see what are the impact that can have a negative, what are the climate impact that have a negative implication on development and address those. And that's really a big problem. Another way of developing hope is the issues of synergetic approach between SDGs and climate. So when you take the energy and the land process, there's so many synergy between the SDG solutions and the climate solutions. And this is a graphic which has been developed in the IPCC Special Report 1.5 that works on the linkages between mitigation options and sustainable development goals using the SDGs, for instance. All the greenish lines, graphic shows the level of confidence where the synergies are possible. So taking such a framework and seeing how it applies to the local communities, to the local level, and try to aggregate solution package for the local communities might be something to be explored quite seriously. But we cannot do that if we are not working seriously on the type of science that matters for Africa. The ACR report 2015 and many reports like UNESCO, have highlighted the importance of solutions to local issues. And you can see that I'm always coming to solutions to local issues. We go to COPs, we discuss global. We go to meetings at UN, we discuss global. When we come back home, there is nothing relevant for communities. We and the new generation of scientists should be very alert on the solutions to local issues and the outcome and achievement that are relevant to them. And while doing that, my sense is we have to be careful where the money comes from. As I told you in the beginning, doing research in Senegal for 11 years, I never had any funding coming from the government. I always had funding coming from DADIDA, from IDRC, from other donors. And yet, all the reporting I'm doing in science is going to those countries. I've never reported my science to the Ministry of Environment or the Ministry of Education. So this is one thing. The other thing is, when the money comes in, where are the priorities? We was used to invest on areas where our scientific interest is, not necessarily where the community interest is. And that's why we have a kind of, separation between the science we do and the priorities of the society. And that needs to be addressed. The other thing which needs to be addressed is the importance of negotiating various priorities with community. We had the challenge, for instance, going to one community. Some people was interested on clean water and also was interested on improving yield. So negotiating the tension between the aspirations of communities is something extremely useful when it comes to SDGs. So that requires a lot of legitimacy assessment and requirement for research actions on the actors that we need to take care of. Sorry for my voice. So when we look forward for the brighter future, I can see that many countries have improved their level of funding of research. And this report from UNESCO shows that the ratio between research and development to the GDP has slightly improved in different countries. But in terms of absolute value, the money which is invested to research is really, really low, still around 1% of the GDP target. The average of investment is 0.4. And we don't have enough money, we don't have enough domestic funding from our countries to address all the level of challenge we are talking about. Development is local. Adaptation is local. And we don't have money to do that. And how can we do that in 11 years and achieve the SDGs? I'm really doubtful that we will arrive to the goals in 2030 because the countries are not investing enough. Opportunities and signs of optimism, that's the level of policy implications and engagement for science. In African Union, there is a plan of action which has been established on science and technology. There is another document which has been established at high level, the Science and Technology Initiative Strategy for Africa. And there is a new institution which is established in Kigali, which is the SDG Center for Africa, to coordinate actions between countries. And the SDG Center for Africa is dealing a lot with the scientists. They have the ambition to connect 50 universities around the SDGs. But we're losing time. We started in 2015, it's 2019, 4 years are gone, and I haven't seen anything real in the continent to create transformation. Another positive sign is the increment in the investment between 2007 and 2013 on research development by 55%. And the number of publications from African scientists is rising also to a rate which is quite positive. But all that should be reconnected again to the domestic problems, to the local problems, not being driven or invited, not being driven by the global agenda itself, but driven by the domestic requirement of development. We should be realistic about how we can accelerate innovation at various scales. NEPAD has developed the Alliance for Accelerating Excellence in Science in Africa, but I'm sure a little number of young scientists know about that alliance. Africa science needs a lot of money. We are investing few millions, but what we need is more than 200 billions to be invested into science to create transformation. We buy the technology very expensive. We are not investing as Korea did, or China, or Japan, too much into innovation, and we are totally doomed for the time being because there is no resources to do research. And this will be justified by many, requirements for SDGs. And as you know, we can't just move forward without having any research funding. So I might be very cynical or very negative here, but achieving SDGs is not just like a lip service. We need to transform the way we do science. So resource mobilization, countries like Ethiopia, Kenya, and other countries, Rwanda, are doing a lot in advancing investment, but there are very few examples among the 54, 55 countries in Africa. Some countries are tapping in private sector, such as South Africa and Namibia, and Africa has a lot of billionaires like Dangote, and the philanthropy money is there. So how can we tap in all these resources to advance science? So we need support from the government level, we need support from the higher education level. And we did not start on the right place, looking for resources and creating the critical mass of scientists to create transformation. Things that might help us quickly in advancing the agenda is to work on using transdisciplinarity processes as a new way of doing science. Until now, people of our generation, we was all lab-oriented, specifics of science driven by laboratory analysis. But now the new pace of doing science is connecting the societal practice with the scientific practice, and understand together the problems and framing the team building, co-creation of solutions, and integration of applications for the local communities. So the transdisciplinarity is oriented to practice, it's oriented to solutions, and I think that's the way we should go forward. It's a very slow process indeed, and we have to check whether it's the best way to accelerate transformation in Africa. And here is the same graphic showing how we can create a flow of information between actions and the available knowledge developed by the scientists, developing a common vision and associating policies, science, researchers, business, and wider society in the way we do science and we translate science. So for the YESS community, what I would see is the 3 levels of um, implications for the SDGs. The 3 levels of implications are, first, the need of discovery. We need to create information that address the local issues based on the different drivers of societal problems, the different states and trends we need to address, the different level of critical areas we need to take care of. So fundamental research is needed because we don't have enough elements of discovery in our society to create solutions that goes to the SDGs solution space. The second level, which is connected to the first one, is the issue of innovation. You know, innovation is a connection between different discoveries.
Thank you.
If you take your cell phone or your smartphone, it's a connection of various discoveries.
Yeah.
Internet discovery.
Thank you very much,
GPS
Dr. Mbow, for this brilliant presentation.
Discoveries to create innovation.
The
After you
topic
create
is
innovation,
very important.
the best way to address SDGs is to move it forward to transformation. That's a scaling up. So everything comes from the ground, comes from the local, comes from the basis of transformation. You cannot just create transformation on the top level. Transformation should start from the bottom level. That's really the message which I wanted to say, because all the problems which I have described it in the presentation, all those problems are local. But the debate and the discussions are intellectually oriented and they are global. So we need to crack down those problems and bring it back to the local issues and see how much of those solutions we can aggregate at local level to create an overall transformation and a general solution space for the SDGs.
Important and very linked to our future in the continent. So,
while we try to focus on transformation,
points were very relevant
to orient it to
to
local and
what
create
we as
acceleration
early
of
career
positive change.
scientists need to focus on and to think for.
Can I ask a question? I'm Rondro from YESS Community. So thanks very much for a very interesting talk, and I really like
attendee here. Is there any question on Dr. Mbow's presentation?
In the SDGs is the way we connect
the way you put it when you said that for the SDGs these are goals, but there are many approaches to tackle them.
Okay,
and my question is, like, do you think Africa?
We cannot rely on the agenda driven by others. We have to create a local, a domestic process of funding science and addressing local problems. The elements of the SDGs to me are not enough to create transformation in Africa in general. And there is one thing which I call the missing SDGs. For instance, the armed conflict, the issue of migration in the Sahel, or the global equity in Africa are something which are not reflected so much in the SDGs. And how do we see that SDGs is not just the states that create all the positive change that we need for Africa? There are also things which are so important for Africa, but is not reflected on the SDGs. And the last one is the issue of complexity. Africa has so many priorities, has so many systems and ecologies, so many power relationships that trying to just address SDGs using simple process will not help address the local issues. So the elements which I wanted to say with my brain very slow today, with my voice broken because of a very serious flu I'm still struggling with. I'm sweating right now where I am to talk. And people who know me may realize that this is not the style of my presentation. It's more Russia. And I'm very sorry for that. But I decided to keep going and canceling this one for the few people who was expecting me to say something about the SDGs. I thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to interactions on few areas, mostly the local orientation or the bottom-up approach, or the impact-oriented research that we need for the continent, for the
from this side, or you'll start from the other side.
The flow for organizing the discussion with people who are online. And thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to your comments and suggestions. Oh, thank you so much, Rondro. This is a great question. See, you see, the way they put the SDGs is made in a way that everybody will find it relevant for his own country. But if you say, for instance, reducing poverty or zero poverty for all, and you go down to the indicators and target, you have detailed aspects of the SDGs that speaks to all countries mostly. But when it comes to the solution, that's where the problem is. When it comes to the solution, the diversity of solutions we have for Germany or for France or for United States is different from the situation in Africa. So when thinking about the SDGs, the goal is there, but the method to reach that goal is not clear now. It's not clear what science, what information, what transformation should be put in place. The countries in Africa are doing the same development approach, which is different from what we really need to reach the goals. So the goals are there, and it's totally okay. Everybody can say, okay, I need health, I need water, I need biodiversity. Everybody can say yes for all the goals. But if you come to Africa and say, ask a country, how would you reach a better life on Earth or a better life on ocean using a different way of development? They don't give you the solution. The example I can give you is the fisheries. If you go to West Africa, we still have a great deal of contracts of fishermen coming from Spain, from Japan, from Europe. They're taking the fish away. So there's no new approaches of creating stability in the resources in our country. They do the same thing, but yet adopt the SDGs as a way of development. And my name is Dari. One thing is to say yes.
I'm a student here in PAUWES.
Another thing is
I have two questions. Number one is about funding research in Africa. You showed us the statistics that even though most African countries have tried to even have a 1% of their budget for research, but up to now, most of them are not even able to reach the 1%. So first question is that how can Africa fund research that can lead to innovative ideas? And the second question is that in Africa, we find out that most youth and even young students, they come out with innovative ideas that can lead to achieving SDG. But most unfortunately, most times these people are not being supported such that their ideas can get all over to the world. Thank you.
But the approach is not okay. Okay, that's it. This is exactly Derek. This is exactly the type of issues which I was talking about. One thing is to set the goal. The other thing is to think about ways to create transformation. You cannot create transformation if you don't invest enough into research. And as you rightly say, 1% of the GDP was the target, and the average in Africa is 0.4% for investing as an investment in research. So we are very far away. And I think 1% is still very low. South Korea, to reach the level they are in innovation and technology, they invested 5 to 6% of their GDP in South Korea. And during independence time in the 60s, Africa was in the same level as South Korea. Now we are importing technology from South Korea. And there are many examples like that in Malaysia, etc. I think it's not even ambitious to have 1% of GDP. We should say 5% of the GDP to take the profit of the demographic dividend, which is the youth. We have a population of 40% of young generation. 40% of the population in Africa are young generation, and yet we are not investing too much on their brains and the way we can use them to be creative. And that speaks to your second question, that although people are very creative, they don't have support. Listen, to me, to have the support, I think a framework and an institutional framework should be created. There is no framework for innovation in Africa for the young generation. People are building universities, creating schools and training, but the framework for
okay, thank you for that. Okay, just on to probably another question, but still similar to that, is that you find that we have many researchers, especially like people at our level, students who are doing a lot of research, lots of publications have been made, but if you look at the impact of these publications on the society, there is very little you can say about them. Most researchers and academicians mostly focus on just doing publications and so on, but they don't really concentrate on how these publications and this research they're doing will impact on the society. So what can we do as researchers to improve on how we are going to make our research impact on the society upon doing the publications or so on? And secondly is about the political will in terms of one, funding the research, increasing the funding in research, and two, also ensuring that we achieve these sustainable goals, sustainable development goals. So you find that there are a lot of things that our governments and the political management tries to do, but you find that there are things that affect the people, especially when you talk about the rich and the poor. So things that affect the poor that we don't see them really focusing on, and they are the most pressing things that should be done by our politicians. So what is it that we can, we as a people can do, or can a way to help in such a case? Okay, my name is Brian.
Thank you. What's your name? Brian, okay. So thank you, Brian, for these two questions. Brian, you touched on an issue which I've been trying to flag in different conferences, where I was talking about moving from impact factor to impact actors. Impact factor is the way we have been evaluated in science, where publishing in Nature in global change biology was the most rewarding for us, like scientists in universities, to move forward from assistant to full professor. But then we did not care too much. And everything we did in science is like, wrapping a paper and throwing it over in the society and expect somebody to use it. So now what we need to change, and I come back to the change in the approach, is to go from impact actor to go from impact factor to the impact of the actors, and put it as an indicator of the evaluation of scientists. If a scientist in Africa is evaluated on the way he transforms society, he creates innovation, and again we should create a framework for that. There is no discussions or space where the Ministry of Higher Education, the Ministry of Research, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Science and Technology, they work together to create a framework which is transversal to help all the students who have something that has some impact on the actors to be promoted. There's no such a thing. After we finish our PhD or finish our master's, there's no translation of that knowledge to society. That's the problem. I did so many algorithms and so many solutions for bushfires or carbon sequestration. But if you don't translate that knowledge to communities for various problems, then I think the science will remain at the university. And actually, we are discussing with UNESCO, how do we create a bottom-up approach where this science can be taken to the society? And there is a lot on that. And again, it's an issue of how we do science as scientists, but it's also the way the science policy is implemented in Africa. And I think it's a huge problem. It's not just by talking about it, we will solve it. We have to recreate a new framework, a new space for connecting science to society. So one thing I would like you to retain, move away from impact factor to embrace impact actor. The second point is the issue of political will and the SDGs. As you rightly mentioned, if we don't deal and tackle the local problems, SDGs will never be attained, actually in Africa. We come from far away and the mountain to climb is so steep. So my response to that is let's localize SDGs. If you don't localize SDGs and we put it on the air, the solution is on the ground, then we would never attain the objective. So many issues are there, intellectually sound. We talk about Paris Climate 2 degrees Celsius. We talk about IQ target on biodiversity. But then the solution is on the ground. How do we localize that? By engaging with communities, by identifying the local priorities which are needed, and get the support from the local governance and the local policymakers to create a bottom-up approach that resolves the problems. Then we are not getting to the best space for this SDGs. So my response to question number 2 is, how do we localize SDGs?
Very much.
How we move from global debate to local solutions. That's where we would see transformation happening to people. And how, when we get innovation and transformation, we make sure that we have pathways and framework to scale it up to people, for people to use it. And there's so many solutions in agriculture, in technology. Every country creates so many apps, with cell phones, but people do not care. They just wait for the pathway defined by developed countries, which does not always suit our needs in Africa. And as long as we continue to that path, we will just not move forward. Korea is a good example. They really develop innovations that suit their need, and they end up having deep transformation for their country. So my question is, we have to create a space where science and policymakers can have an interface and discuss those problems. That's a very good question, Rondro, and I had been having this tension as I was a young scientist to have the recognition and to grow in my career, and at the same time to do useful research. And that's where I try to say that we need to change the criteria. As long as the criteria is to become a full professor if you publish in Nature, then we would continue the same way of doing science without really having implications on society. Look, if you take the case of the United States, which science have created a lot of transformation. The people who was guiding science are the private and the business sector. If you take Amazon or if you take any of these big institutions, they invested in Silicon Valley a lot of money in MIT and Stanford University, etc., in Michigan State University for the agriculture. And when investing, they're looking for research that have impact on the development of things they can scale up. Fighting some diseases on maize. That was something that was discovered in Michigan State University. And they bring it back to society, and the farmers who invested into that research, they use it. But do we have that interface where the fabric of milk in your country has come to university, or the farmers of tomato have come to the university and say, we have $1 million, we need to solve the problem of the diseases of the tomato production. It does not happen in Africa. It does not also happen that any ministry who wants to create innovation on agriculture or on technology come to university or research centers and give $1 million to them to create solutions for their problems. And in developed countries, that is what is happening. The linkage between the private sector and the public sector with the research is something we haven't been creating in Africa. And
Dr. Mbow, there is another question from Omar. Omar Farouk. Omar Farouk is online and is asking the question to know how to prevent the privatization. I'm going to read the question. He said, how privatization of some key public sectors in Africa can help achieve the SDGs at the local level. He continues saying, what strategies to put in place? I repeat the question. How privatization of some key public sectors in Africa can help to achieve the SDGs at the local level, and what are the strategies to put in place?
New practical solutions in science as a way to evaluate science. And another way is to create the bridge between science and policymakers, science and business. Sorry. Omar, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Jean-Pierre. Thank you, Antonio. I'm glad to come to the end of the webinar, and that was really rich and fruitful discussion. I fully agree on what has been saying in the presentation on the role of the early career scientists to drive the change in the continent, which I really believe in. I would like to thank Dr. Mbow. I thank you very much for the brilliant presentation and for accepting the invitation to join us today. I also would like to thank the students, the attendees for the great discussion, the organizing team for the hard work and making this event a real success. The record and the report about the webinar of today will be shared on the event webpage and also on YESS and PAUWES website and social media channels. I also take the opportunity to announce the next webinar. The fourth one will be next month and will be given by Professor Jenito Moore from the University of South Africa.
Will create a creative environment where people will be so creative that they will bring new solutions that the public sector will not be able to bring, because they will follow policy plans, they will follow, rigid framework, and without changing this rigidity in the public sector, achieving SDG will be problematic. We need a lot of flexibility.
So just a small reminder about
a lot of different pathways of addressing issues.
Well, so we are running out on the extra minutes, so I'm going to give the floor to the COP, the Community of Practice, for the closing words and the side of PAUWES before giving the floor to Fatem.
With the contribution of future
All right. Dr. Mbow, we are so grateful and very happy for the valuable time that you've given to us this afternoon. You've really taken us through the knowledge that we need to learn for us to get to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. On behalf of the PAUWES side, we are so thankful. Our attendees, both physical and online, I think they have at least gained. They have not remained the same 1 hour before we started. So we are so generally thankful for mostly for the time that you've given us, and we hope that we shall keep sharing and learning more from you, Doctor. We are really thankful.
Yes, Fateh?